Welcome to the bizval podcast. At bizval, we are passionate about empowering entrepreneurs the world over to understand and unlock the value in their business. We work with advisors and entrepreneurs to demystify the value creation process when building a business. At bizval, we know how tough it is to grow and run a business, which is exactly why we've made valuation simple to understand, accurate, and affordable. Our unique blend of tech and touch ensures that you always receive the best service, authentic human engagement, and data-led insights to ensure that you build a business that provides you with freedom and choice. In the bizval podcast, we showcase stories of real entrepreneurs and advisors, sharing lessons and inspiration from their journeys to make your journey just that little bit easier.
Today's guest is somebody who's done it all before, from legal counsel to family business leader, through an MBO and into partnering with others. I'm thrilled to welcome Gary Baker, MD of Aurik UK. Gary, we're really excited to have you with us today.
Morning, Graham. It's great to be here as well. Thank you.
Fantastic. So, Gary, we're going to talk a bit about your backstory, where you're at the moment. So, let's go back to the beginning. You started out in the legal world, corporate roles, working with major corporations like Sony, Nokia. Maybe just share a little bit about, firstly, why did you go into legal and corporate in the first place? What did that role teach you? But I think also at what point did you, decide you needed to pull the trigger, so to speak, and step into, the family business? So let's go back to the beginning.
Gosh, yeah, feels like a long time ago now. My legal career actually started before Sony and Nokia. So I trained and qualified a Magic Circle UK firm called Freshfields, which was a pretty incredible place to learn, actually. Really high standards, high pressure. I did realize early on that private practice probably wasn't for me long term. But it taught me something I think that stuck with me forever, and that's the importance of being absolutely sort of on point, getting things right straight away. Even to this day, I can still spot a typo from a mile away. That sort of attention to detail, that professional discipline is truly baked into how you go about working, really. And then, so I did move in-house because I realized that I didn't want to be a private practice lawyer. The sort of the law for law's sake wasn't for me.
Yeah.
And I got that blue chip experience at, Sony, Nokia. And I started to see the other side of things. And for me, I learned quite quickly that there was no such thing as a legal issue in isolation. So it's actually always a commercial decision, and your job's to help weigh up the risks and then move forward. And that was a bit of a mindset shift for me, really, from the black and white legal answers to a much more nuanced commercial judgment call. And then the turning point came when I was at Nokia. To progress further up the pole, I was probably going to have to go and live in Finland. To get, the next step of the career. Not sure my wife and 3 young boys at that point were particularly keen to go and live there. So there was a bit of good timing because at the same time I got a call from my father talking about getting involved in the family business. So I had 3 very young lads, and we up sticks and moved back to Yorkshire, and the family business journey sort of began, really.
Well, we're gonna dive into that in a second. I just want to relate your story around, I guess the importance of doing your articles and traineeship with the
Articles,
law
that's showing
firm.
your age, Graham. I was a trainee. I never did articles. They didn't exist by the time I was around.
Yeah, but I mean, there's a lot to take out of that. I mean, I'm a chartered accountant, and I never spent a day in a finance department after my articles or traineeship. But I think it's often it's not the technical skills you learn there. It's learning to walk into the CFO's office and engage with confidence. It's the networks you build. It's understanding the broader things on how businesses work and function, and I think there's a lot to be said for that. And you've experienced something very similar in your traineeship, as I shall say, and then also moving into the corporate world. So our paths have actually followed a very similar journey. And yeah, as you say, I also talk a lot about my dad and how initially that, didn't want to have anything to do with entrepreneurship, but it does full circle, and you get to a point where you get the call.
Yeah.
But let's talk a bit about that. So you joined CD UK. It was your dad's import and distribution business in the UK, and that's a big shift from, I'm paraphrasing here, from legal contracts to like packing crates.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I'm probably oversimplifying it,
No, no.
what are some of the changes in that transition?
Yeah, that's a huge shift, right? Yeah, absolutely. Multinationals, big legal teams, to a family-run distribution business on a trading estate just outside Leeds. It was a huge culture shock. I think, I mean, for me, the thing I wanted to avoid actually was because you're going into your dad's business. I was really conscious of the whole nepotism tag.
Mm.
Um, I didn't I didn't want people thinking I'd just parachuted in because I was the boss's son, which I had,
Yeah.
right? But equally, I wanted to show that I was worthy of that.
Yeah.
So I sat down with each and every one of the 34 staff at that point, individually. And I took time to explain what I'd walked away from and the career I'd left behind, because I wanted them to understand the value of that. And
Yeah.
then more importantly, I asked them what they thought about the business. So, what was working, what wasn't. And in hindsight, that was the best thing I could have done, I think, because it was just giving them a bit of a voice and realizing that I was there to listen and learn. I didn't actually know anything about business. You think you do. I
Mm.
had a legal background and I worked in businesses, but I didn't know anything about business. And I think showing that was important. And then there was the whole pace thing. You come from a high performance environment where people would say, I'll do that by Friday, and it would get done by Friday, or probably even Thursday. Yeah. And then
Yeah.
see the UK, if someone didn't get around to it, they didn't really see the problem. And I'd wander into the office at 5:01 and go, where is everyone? It
Mm.
was it's just this huge adjustment, really. And I
They're
was
clocked out with the clock card and everything.
yeah,
So-
yeah, well, yes, and my dad would happily say, "It's not bloody Nokia here," as I came up with another bright idea, and actually, he was probably right. You have to sort of adjust your view of the world to the business and not force it to come to you, I think. And and then the other key thing is the dynamic of working with your dad. I had a
Mm.
father who was very much a force of nature. He built up this business from scratch, and in fact, he built a whole
Mm.
industry from scratch. So on the one hand, you've got this sort of legacy and this huge pair of shoes to fill, and on the other, if you're going to lead, you've got to find your own voice. And at some point, it's pretty grim actually, because the young lion has to earn their place in the pride, and that's really hard when the Lion King is your dad. Um,
Yeah.
and that's the reality. And I think people who don't do that, I was speaking recently to someone who was really struggling with that, and she wasn't necessarily going. Well, she didn't necessarily want to kill the Lion King, and it's hard,
Mm.
right? So separate. I think the key is separating the business side of things from the family relationship,
Mm.
and that's not easy. It's not easy to do, and I'm not sure I always got it right. We had thinking back, we had a really difficult year where we were at each other, and I realized that I'd taken over a lot, and Dad was sort of seeing bits of what was going on, and he'd see
Mm.
something happening and not understand the whole, and that it just started really eating him up. So the fight we had was around moving him across the road to another building we had. and essentially out of sight, out of mind. What he couldn't see couldn't hurt him, I think. And once we got over that hump, actually he was much happier, and it allowed me the freedom to sort of crack on. It's probably worth saying I was very lucky because there was a peacemaker involved. So Dad had built CD UK up with a business partner, Tony, and
Yeah.
she just knew how to, I guess, manage him properly and calm things down and move things on. And I will be forever grateful to the role that Tony played between father and son, calming stuff down and making us be able to deal with each other. So we were lucky in that sense.
I'm going to dive into a little bit more and kind of that transition now, but I just, in terms of what you've mentioned, there's a few things that stuck out for me there, Gary, is I think coming into that space, one is kind of having the humility to actually recognize that whilst you were a great solicitor, lawyer, corporate person,
Not sure about
you had a
great.
lot to learn. Yeah, exactly. And I think also, just coming in and being prepared to listen, before you act, understand how things work, take the time to and build the trust of the team. And as you're talking about that transition as well, it's interesting. The first things you've mentioned are some of the sort of more emotional aspects of that transition, rather than, let's call it, these are the 5 steps to exit readiness or transition. So I think that often gets underplayed, is that sort of the softer side of transition, building a business, moving on, taking on. So I'm sure we'll talk a bit about that later. But let's move into, so you've explained, yeah, you kind of worked alongside your dad for a bit, shuffled him to the dark room in the back that he couldn't see what was going on.
It was a good 10
You
years
eventually
later, right? It wasn't immediate. That was a slow process. Yeah.
exactly. But you eventually took the reins. So maybe can you dive a little bit deeper into how did you go about, kind of professionalizing the business? He's built a great business. He's got 34 employees. The young Simba comes in, taking over from Mufasa. But how did you go about professionalizing the business while still respecting what he had built and his legacy, and not, I guess, ruining your relationship in the process?
Yeah, and I think that is a constant tension. So I think the one thing that I had going for me was that, so when I joined CD UK, the business was at a bit of a crossroads. So had I not stepped in when I did, there's a good chance that the business wouldn't have survived for much longer, because CD UK is the exclusive distributor of a solid surface material called Corian. It's manufactured by US multinational DuPont. And the big bad Americans had turned around to Dad and Tony, because she was in her 60s and Dad was 70 at that point, and said, what's the plan? And unless there's a plan here, we're going to walk away. So without that clear next chapter, he risked losing the business. But it was more than that for him. It was his whole identity. His whole life was the business. So he needed me, and therefore there was a bit of a space for me to move into. Although then the reality once you're there is very different. So, but that's a situation that's really common, right? He and Tony were really central to everything. There wasn't a team behind them, which was why there was no succession. There was just a group of really hardworking people who doing what they were told, essentially. So for me, the first thing was, how do we decentralize this? How do we make the business a bit more self-reliant, and not just on 2 people or 3 with me there? And one of the biggest cultural shifts to start doing that, because everything comes down to the culture. Nothing happens on hard fact. That's why the emotional bit that you talked about, I think, is so important. So my dad's old school approach was, don't tell anyone anything. That if they'll only hold it against you. So that, and I was by nature, I'm really transparent. I just think it's better you share things. So that was a fight, right? But over time we started sharing our sales numbers. We set targets. There was no target. No one had anything to aim for. So
Yeah.
we were involving the team in where we were going for once. And I think that shift was the first way of showing them that the business was changing and starting to build momentum. And then I think I also instinctively felt that if you're going to grow, you've got to make people feel empowered, whatever the right word is. And actually, the business had hit a bit of a ceiling because everything ran through two people. And there were only so many
were the
in a
bottleneck.
day or week. And letting go was not something Dad found easy. We had this constant fight, and he would nickname me the Great Delegator. So I think it's Charlie Chaplin had done the film The Great Dictator, which he loved. He loved it. But him calling me the Great Delegator was not a compliment in any way, shape, or form. It was him viewing me as offloading responsibility. But I knew that you just can't do it on your own.
Yeah.
And then further down the line, as we grew and we went to sort of 50, 60, 70 people, I think we peaked at about 84. I went big on introducing values to the business. So I truly believe that if you can align people around shared behaviors and attitudes, those are the conditions for sort of real accountability and taking a handbrake off the business. And it allows managers to manage, it allows standards to be set and maintained. And I mean, that's a slow process, right? You don't suddenly introduce values and change how the business behaves. And it's quite frankly never finished. It's constantly ongoing. And I do believe it's fundamental to any successful business. And then the final thing I'd talk about was a bit of serendipity in that I found the right person to partner with so Andy Noble, who'd come into the business to run the sales team. He eventually took on sales and marketing and then stepped up to be managing director. And he was better than me at running the operational side of things. He much more structured, much more focused on that. I'm a complete, starter and then flitter onto the next thing. And Andy brought sort of that day-to-day consistency and discipline to the business. And that taught me that you've got to know what your own blind spots are, know where your skills are and maximize how you do those, and then surround yourself with great people who can do the other stuff that you're not so good at.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot in what you spoke about there. I mean, one is, we talk about businesses becoming owner dependent, right? And resolving owner dependence isn't just a case of, giving somebody a job title as a chief operations officer and document some processes. It's actually about transferring, let's call it cultural ownership. It's a mindset of ownership for everybody who's doing their role and thinking about succession in that sense. And I like your point also around, perhaps it's easier when you come in from the side. I know a lot of owners struggle with that. I'm sure your dad grappled with that. But you coming in from the side, in some ways, almost easier to see some of the blind spots, some of the gaps, question why you're doing it this way versus the way he's always done it. So I think there's a
that's
lot
the
in
ultimate argument, isn't it? Is do
Yeah.
we carry on doing it the way that's always worked, right? Or do we change things up? But why are you changing it up? And that, as generationally, that's the crux of the debate. Absolutely.
Yeah. Absolutely. And there's a lot of that, what you're talking about with your dad, some of that's a generational shift. Let's call it, for want of a better word, the boomer generation. But also some of that is the trap that a lot of owners, whether they're Gen X, Gen Y, Gen Z, Boomer, get stuck in their own heads with. I want to move on a little bit,
Right.
and you kind of started to transition the business now. So, um, you know, moving towards an MBO or management buyout. Okay. So maybe just give a bit of a timeline around that. What inspired this move to kind of say, hey, okay, I've come in here, I've done a bit of a role, what's next? And what groundwork, you've touched on some of them, but what else was necessary to make this MBO happen?
I don't think actually everything I've talked about was nothing to do with the sort of MBO or exit. It was just building. At that time, my mindset was just build this as a family business for the forever, but make it as good as it could be type thing. Make my mark on it. And yeah, it's funny because a lot of people said to me, how could you sell the family business? But for me, it's still a family business. It's just not in our family anymore. It's just, it's in a different family. There's someone
Yeah.
else at the helm now, with fresh energy, and a real stake in its future. And that's the point for me is the goal was always to build something that could keep going. And then it shifted in my mindset to, surviving beyond my father and then me. And I probably didn't realize it, but starting out, Dad was the role model. We always joke we'd wheel him out, and effectively that's what we did. And forever, that was what I thought I would do. Right, I'd just carry on going.
Yeah.
But I'd been doing it for about 15 years, and I hit a bit of a wall. I was stale. I have to say, football managers, the Jurgen Klopp was really good when he left Liverpool. He said, "I've just done it. I've had my time. I can't do it anymore." And that sort of resonated with me. And that's different for every person. And I think you sort of get stuck in your own paradigm. You do what you've always done, and that's because what you know. And then COVID came along, and that was a time for many people of a bit of self-reflection. And I my wife was, I think, half jokingly threatening to leave me because I was so miserable. I better do something about it. And sometimes you need that kick as well, don't you? You need someone else to go, hang on, what's this about? And you start looking
Yeah.
at the world through a different lens. So, would the business be better off if I got out of the way? Maybe that would be better for me too. And I just never thought about it like that. So, and that shift, it was what I realized later was effectively I started looking at things. I'd been the owner operator, and I started looking at things more as an owner shareholder, owner investor. And that was a bit of a game changer for me because it helped reframe everything about my role, my value, what succession could really look like. And then actually, most businesses have a choice. They can then go to market, and that can look like a lot of different things. But CD UK was built on that exclusive relationship with DuPont. And a third-party trade buyer wasn't really viable because why would DuPont
Yeah.
want that? Why would they do that?
Yeah. Yeah.
So Andy had been leading the commercial side, and then so that was the opportunity for me. Do you want to do this, Andy? This is an opportunity for you. And once he decided he did, then we started planning that transition. And the key was to move the operational leadership to him before we then spoke to, say, a DuPont about the change in ownership coming. Because in that way, for them, other key stakeholders, at the point it was announced or talked about, it was just business as usual. I hadn't been involved by
Exactly.
then in the day-to-day for a good while, and so
Yeah.
there was no objection. And actually, to make sure I didn't get in the way, because I have a personality that wants to run things, and so did Andy. You know, it had to be his train set. So to make sure I wasn't meddling,
Yeah.
I set up another business called Intelligent Appliances, and that was to give myself something else to focus on, and also to do a bit of something for me. CD was always my father's baby, and I was sort of taking it emotionally. So that gave Andy the space he needed, but with the safety net of me still being around, I guess, if he needed anything.
Yeah.
I think the one, just to finish this bit really, the one big learning in hindsight, and it's interesting because I had a legal background, I had a sort of corporate background, and you'd have thought I was a reasonably sophisticated seller in that sense, but we did spend time getting the business running smoothly day to day, but I certainly didn't spend enough time preparing for third-party scrutiny that comes with a sale. And in family businesses that have been around forever, there's a load of stuff that just happens or happened, and no one knows why. It's in the midst of time. There's no paperwork to back it up. There's no, and when you're then sitting across the table from lawyers and accountants trying to understand what their client is actually buying, that becomes an issue. So if I had my time again, if I was helping someone else, I'd certainly make sure, as well as the business running well, that you use the time ahead of the stressful time to make sure all the externalities or the things that external people are going to look at were in place and were neat and tidy and understood.
To extend that analogy, with the family, often the stuff it either just gets tossed into the attic and accumulates as junk.
Yeah.
You
Well,
know,
and the
but
people who made the
takes just
decision
as
aren't,
much
aren't
effort.
even around, right? So, why did that
Exactly.
why did that happen? Well, ask my father. Well, you can't, and sadly, because he's not even here. So it's just a reality.
Absolutely. But the point is there. I mean, I sure we'll touch on it shortly, but it takes just as much effort to toss something into the bin or into the attic as it does to put it into a neat filing cabinet.
Yeah,
So we
that's
talk about
true.
this concept of a living
Okay.
data room,
Okay. Yeah.
and there's some practical steps which you can take. But let's move on from there. So
Okay.
MBO is complete. You've now started intelligent appliances on the side. And what happened next? Okay, so so maybe just talk a little about the intelligent. You spoke about that as, kind of a little bit of a transitory thing. But how did you pivot into something new? And I want to kind of segue from there into Aurik UK. So, how did you move from, okay, I've done the MBO, I've done a bit of a pivot, and how did you land up where you are now?
So to be honest, I was completely done in after the MBO, I'd shut down Intelligent Appliances at the same time as doing the MBO. Many reasons, but that was emotionally difficult, as well as the stress of getting a deal done. I then was shutting down a business and letting people down in that sense. The employees of Intelligent Appliances. So I came out of the whole period completely drained. I just gave myself some breathing space. I, spent proper time with the family. Did a bit of nothing for the first time in years. And in reality, the biggest gift the sale gave me was exactly that, a bit of time. So time to figure out what I really wanted to do next.
Yeah.
And I was probably leaning towards a sort of portfolio style life, bit of consultancy, non-exec roles. And I was then introduced to Pablo Fitidis, who was one of the co-founders of Aurik. He built the business in Southern Africa over the last couple of decades, and he was over in the UK looking for a partner to take it on. And there was just this real spark in that first conversation. So his family business story had a lot of parallels to mine, and I think we just recognised a lot of each other when we were talking. And then I think really importantly, we both acted on it. So it wasn't just a nice chat we had. We both realized there was an opportunity, and we worked hard at sort of developing a relationship and making sure that we could work together. And I guess pretty quickly I knew I wanted to be all in on Aurik. So and that was probably purpose driven. So when I joined CD UK, as I said earlier, Dad was staring down the barrel of the business shutting if there was no succession. And as we've talked about, that's not unusual, right? So here in the UK, especially, we've got a lot of well-established businesses. There's about 150,000. And a lot of those have no clear next chapter. So 40 years of blood, sweat, and tears. And then what, guys? Because the reality is, statistically, you're just going to shut down. And we are obsessed with startups in the UK. We throw a lot of taxpayer money at them, which is gambling, quite frankly, because the statistics on the success rate is tiny, and we don't do nearly.
I think something like only 20% of businesses make it to year 5,
Well, exactly,
or thereabouts.
Exactly. So if 1 in 5 is even going to make it, and you think about the amount of money going into those, and yet you've got this backbone of the economy, which is 150,000 businesses that have been going for longer than 5 years, the mid-tier, the forgotten middle, and we don't do anything to support them. Literally nothing. In fact, it's gone the other way. They're now they're seen as the wrongdoers currently by the current government. So for me, helping the owners of those businesses shift the mindset, build a real value, set their businesses up to last beyond them, that's become something that I care really strongly about. And it's what Aurik's all about. It's what Aurik's premised on. So that's why I'm now at Aurik doing what we do.
It's super interesting. You talk about that values alignment, but almost your first foray into entrepreneurship was born out of, let's call it, necessity and responsibility. And I guess what makes this different is, as you say, it's driven by purpose and passion. And I suppose you've got the scars and the learnings and that to transfer some of those lessons, not just into one business, but into multiple businesses. So you can sort of amplify that reach. So maybe just share a little bit about, that sort of Aurik journey. I mean, it's relatively new to the UK, as you say. I mean, Pablo has been around in South Africa for years, and he's built a big following in that over here. But talk about how Aurik's really working with and helping UK, let's call it, legacy businesses and other businesses in terms of that ownership. Like, what makes you guys different and special?
Well, so we work with the established business owners, as you said, typically owner-led, the mid-tier, and we solve 5 challenges that those businesses all come up against. So scaling in chaos. So everything's going really well. It sounds like a great problem to have, and everything's out of control. Yeah, which can be awful, right? It can be worse than anything. It sounds great, and it's horrible to live through.
It's like juggling with tennis balls. If you, I mean, I can juggle 1 ball, maybe 2. You add a 3rd one, and then you add that 4th one,
and then you're all over the place,
crumbles.
right? Yeah. Exactly. That's a nice analogy. And then the opposite of that is stagnation. So we've been around for 15 years. We've done really well, and we've just hit the buffers, and we don't know how to shift things up. The third area is around team performance. So we want the right people doing the right thing at the right time every time. Is the nirvana, and it's really difficult to achieve. And it's even more difficult to achieve when you are the personality like my father, who'd got through those 5 years to get the business up and running. You need to be resilient, probably stubborn, really driven. You're often deeply entrenched in the business, and that means you may be not so good at delegating and bringing on a team behind you. Okay, and that links then to the 4th area, which is succession. So I'd like to pass the business on to the next generation. So, like with my father to me, family, or it might be leadership, which is what I did with then the MBO. The relationships and the know-how are with me as the founder or as the owner. And actually, I don't. So in my father's case, he didn't really want me there. Once I was there, he didn't enjoy passing stuff on, so he'd just get frustrated and say, "Oh, you bloody do it then." Which I fully understand because he just was so passionate about it. It wasn't, it was done out of good intent, or it might be just really hard to explain in a sort of methodical way that someone else can understand how you do it. And even just letting go of the big relationship with your supplier or the customer, you don't want to do that because what do you do then? So it doesn't happen very easily, and the stats on successful succession are pretty low as well. And the final area is exit. I've been doing this a long time, and I want to get value for the business, and then the reality hits when someone values a business, and it is so much lower because of the total dependency on the owner, and therefore what are you actually buying as a third party? So how we solve those issues is essentially by helping owners step out of the operational grind. Yeah. So we would talk about them being stuck in the engine room of a ship, which is below deck. So the daily, weekly, monthly firefighting that these guys get trapped in. And how do you shift your focus to building a strategic, scalable business? I think what's key is we don't just help come up with a plan and then walk away, which is where consultants stop, right? And that's where owners get stuck. Oh, great idea, but then they get dragged back into that engine room. What makes us different at Aurik is that we partner with businesses to actually execute the plan, obsessively, systematically building the commercial infrastructure that turns the business into a machine that can grow without being dependent on the founder. So we're growth partners, and we back that up by putting skin in the game. So more than 70% of our fees are success-based, tied to the new revenue we help generate. So if the business doesn't grow, we don't get paid. And that, when I was talking to Pablo originally, that really resonated because I've been in that seat. I know what it's like to run a business that's grown beyond its original shape, I guess, where everything starts to bottleneck through the owner, and the danger of getting stuck there unless you do something about it. But it's really hard to do something about it. And that comes down to that mindset shift again. I bang on about it, shift away from being the operator to being the investor. Most people, the business is just a job. Actually, if you condense it down, you've got to start seeing it as an asset, and how do you build out that asset, and how do you maximize its value, whatever you want to do with it, whether nothing to do with wanting to sell it or just carry on a business, but a healthier business is one that is more valuable 24 months down the line than it is today. And it's the best way of measuring the health of a business. So that's what
I think that's an important point. I mean, we had a webinar the other day, and somebody said they hate the term. There's a guy called Mike Finger in the US, and he used the term. He said, I don't like. I think it was Mike. He said, I don't like the term exit, but he doesn't have a better word for that because everyone focuses on the exit rather than building a better business or a business of value ultimately. And I think that's such an important distinction that you talk to, Gary.
And well, I think it matches you, right? There are a million, what's bizval about? People will immediately go to a valuation, and then they'll go, oh, well, the only reason to value the business is to flog it, right? But there are a million reasons why you would want to know the valuation of your business. And actually, the better you understand what your business is worth at a given point, that's how you can build it. Because if you build it to be more valuable, it's going to be a better business. And people
Absolutely.
don't realize how important valuation is as the underlying health indicator of a business. So, you know,
Mhm.
we love that premise of what you guys do, because it sits sort of alongside what we need to do. You can't improve something if you can't measure it to start with, and
You
then
can't measure it.
you go. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting because I mean our stats show and is that I think it's just less than 30% of valuations we do are actually for an exit or planned exit. 70% is around I need to scenario plan or I'm thinking about structure or various other things, and just to use that an analogy, it's a bit like a health thing. You're probably, you're similar age to me. We're getting to that age now where, you know, you need to go for those annual checkups, which aren't so great, and all those things.
Sniper's Alley, I think it's known as, which is, not a
Yeah, but
great term, but it's the reality of it. Yeah.
it's about those habits we had in our 20s and 30s, I guess, that impact you now. Were you a chain smoker? Yeah, if you stopped at 40, you still have those knock-on effects and all those good things. But Gary, I just before we kind of wrap with a sort of a rapid fire section, maybe just to wrap, is there for the founders or advisors or anyone listening, if you were to kind of zone in on one or two sort of starting points or things that you would advocate for business owners to think about, what would those one or two like most critical things be? If somebody's listening today and saying, well, where do I start?
Ooh, yeah, it's a good one, isn't it? I think as the owner, realize that, or as the leader, you're not. You need to let go of the need to be the one who knows everything.
Mm,
Yeah. So that's, I think that's what a lot of people struggle with, right? I'm at the peak, I'm at the tip of the point here. Everyone's looking at me, so I've got to know the answer. And that actually
mm,
becomes the weakness in itself, as opposed to understanding that you don't know everything. You just need to be, you need to get out of the way, serve the business, and allow the business to grow around you. And I think that it comes back to what I said earlier about shifting to that investor mindset. You've invested a lot of money likely into your
mm,
business. If you were giving that to someone else, you'd be wanting them to build that business in a way that you could get a dividend return, and also
mm,
when you exited, it would be worth more. But how many people are looking at their own business through that lens? Um,
mm,
and if you do, you start to view it differently. You don't say, how do I fix this? You say, how do we build a commercial system, a process, so it doesn't need
mm.
fixing again? Who else can lead
Yeah,
this so that I don't have to? Um,
yeah.
and that's not easy. Certainly, if you've got a previous generation telling you that as family you're the only one who can do it, or if you've spent years firefighting and being at the center of everything, so that the goal is to build a business of real lasting value, and therefore you have to step out the spotlight and get out the way. Not easy, and you can't do that overnight, because that's the point, right? You can't just suddenly say, right, I'm going to leave this to everyone else so that the business becomes more valuable. You have to build the platform, the scale, the processes and activities underpinning the business,
Mm,
and slowly devolve and delegate responsibility to the people who are closest to that area of the business, and slowly free
mm.
up your time. It's an ongoing process, but
Yeah.
it's the mindset that starts first that allows you to do that.
Absolutely. I mean, as you say, a couple of things in that, it's getting your ego out the way. I think that's often a blocker. But just to kind of close in on that is, you're a parent. I've got a almost 70-year-old son and an almost 14-year-old daughter. And I think there's a lot of parallels as you get older and more mature. Like when your kids are young, you're like, sit at the dinner table, be quiet, and
Yeah.
eat your dinner. At 17 years old, believe you me, that doesn't work anymore. So as a parent, all you can
And
do
nor
is
would you
is
want
is
it to,
prepare your
right? You don't
Yeah,
want it to actually. If you really think about it, you want them to
yeah.
have something about them
You
to
want them
be
to fly the
important.
nest and
Exactly.
be independent and all those
Yeah.
things. So I always, as I've gotten older, I've realized, like being a parent and building businesses and that. And I think sometimes finding relatable examples that you can share with business owners when that business owner is like stuck is to say, well, think about your kids. Do you want them at 28 years old having their ironing, washing, cooking done? Well, think about your business in the same way. So
Yeah. Absolutely.
Gary, let's end with a few sort of fun rapid fire questions, and then we'll wrap up.
All right.
So I think we've covered some of them already, but your first job.
No, probably not what you think. So it was making metal shutters for one of my dad's businesses when I was about 14.
Okay, so there was method in his madness that was preparing you for 20 years later.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
Your most underrated founder or business owner trait.
It's what we just said, realizing it's not about you. Get out the way and serve others.
Yeah, so that concept of servant leadership, if you want to call it that, it's easy to talk about it. It's harder to do.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
your favorite book or a book that any business owner or founder should read?
So there's only one answer. You know the answer to this, Graham. So it has to be Sweat,
I,
Scale and Soul by Pablo Fitidis, doesn't it? It can only be
I was
that.
waiting for that.
Actually, but I have to say I have to plug my wife's book as well because she's written a book called look at this called Staying the
Go
Distance.
for it.
The lessons
Can
from
you move it up a bit
sport.
so we
Can you
can see the author? Your wife's name is
Catherine Baker. So the
Catherine
lessons from
Baker. Okay, so
sport
anyone
business
listening,
leaders have been missing.
is that her? What's it? A self autobiography on surviving with her partner being Gary Baker.
Oh no, no, quite the opposite. It's everything that I never did and now maybe have learned a bit about. It's a really good read. It's
That's just a bit of tongue in cheek.
hers is about people who've
Um,
been properly successful in sport. So and actually focuses on a lot more about women in sport because often women if you start talking about sport, they get a bit bored by that. But so it's trying to
Well, I'm going to
use
I'm going
female
to be in the
examples
UK in
as
a few
well.
weeks, Gary, and I'm going to ask for a signed copy if we
Okay,
make that
well,
happen. So
I'll try and get hold of one. Now, if you want a book by someone I don't know, then that would be More Pirate by Sam Conniff as well. So
okay,
that's a long
we'll
answer.
check that out.
Three for the price of one there.
Okay, last question. I mean, your biggest business mistake to date, because I'm sure you're going to make a few more along the way.
Yeah. So many. Well, I've got a longer term one, which is not investing in high caliber team members early enough, not paying the money for them. I had a one-off disaster where I ordered a second shipment of product for the internet startup, and we hadn't secured sales for the first shipment, so that tied up all our cash, and that was what eventually sank us. So yeah, you live and learn, as they say.
Gary, before we wrap, I mean, how can any of our listeners get hold of you? What's the easiest way to reach out if they've got any questions or they're looking for
Um,
somebody to help them along that journey?
Your phone, email. I don't, really, yeah, whichever suits them. I'm on LinkedIn. If you want to share my details afterwards, then please do. It'd be great to hear from any business owner who thinks that Aurik might be a good partner for them.
Fantastic. Well, always wonderful to have a chat with the Yorkshireman. So, uh, but Gary,
That's
you've
not
been
what
absolutely
most people
wonderful.
say. So thank you for that, Graham. Appreciate that.
I just really appreciate your transparency, your humbleness, your down to earthness, if that's a word, and the insights. So it's been an absolute pleasure to have you here today. And yeah, if you enjoyed this podcast, please go and reach out to Gary. Check it out. We're on YouTube, the bizval website, LinkedIn. And if you're a founder who's serious about building real value, we'd love to talk to you. Check us out on www.bizvalglobal.com or reach out to our guest, Gary Baker. We work closely with him and his team So, and we do different things in different parts of the value chain. So, wonderful to have you here today. Gary, all the best. And yeah, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for the invite, Graham. Really enjoyed that. Great to have spoken with you.